My pleasure, thank you.
Well, for more on this and the rest of the day's political debate, I'm joined here in the Canberra studio by Kelvin Thomson, of course, our Labor MP for the day, and Sharman Stone, Liberal MP. Thanks both for your time today.
Good afternoon, Sharman. Good
My
afternoon,
pleasure.
Tom.
Nice to see you, Colin.
All right, well, further to this story, you've heard Peter Jennings' thoughts there, obviously. Can I ask you, Kelvin, do you think indications that the government is considering joining in airstrikes with the US, not committed yet, but perhaps joining in there, and no troops on the ground, is that about where it's at the moment? Would that be appropriate action?
Well, what I want to emphasise is the importance of acting through the United Nations. Australia is presently a member of the Temporary Council, a temporary member of the UN Security Council, and we should use that position in order to seek United Nations action. I think that what happened in Iraq last time through the coalition of the willing was a disaster, and it underscores the undesirability of that sort of adventurism. I don't think we should be doing things unilaterally, but that's not to say that we shouldn't be doing things. Clearly, the Islamic State are outrageous. Clearly, they are a danger to civilians there. There is a doctrine, the responsibility to protect civilians, and I think we should be using the United Nations as an appropriate vehicle to seek that collective international action.
Sharman Stone, does Australia need to only go via the UN, whatever happens there?
I think we have a very strong ally in the US, obviously, self-evidently, and we are a country that always pulls our weight when there's a humanitarian crisis, wherever that might be. Our focus as Australians and through our government today is response to the humanitarian crisis. It's evolving as a result of this shocking terrorist group, this caliphate. Islamic State, they call themselves, an unfortunate name given Islam is not about terrorist activity necessarily.
And many people, or just about everybody within the Islamic community, of course, says they don't represent us.
Exactly. So my son was involved in the first Iraq war. He's in the army, and I wouldn't agree it was an unmitigated disaster at all. It was what we had to do at the time. And
you defend the entire approach?
I defend Australia's engagement in the, I'll call it the first Iraq war, given what was happening on the ground there at the time.
That was in part going lockstep with the US, wasn't it?
It was in part, well not in part, in full going in lockstep with not only US but the UK. There was a coalition of the willing, you'll recall. And I think Australia acted very appropriately at that time. We are at this time, of course, looking at a terrorist state that's been set up, that's threatening minority groups in a way we've probably never seen before, on the basis of their religion, just literally wiping them out. With weapons of mass destruction, possibly, but certainly with weapons that they've got hold of. So Australia, our coalition government, and I'm sure in a bipartisan way, is saying that we need to do what we can on a humanitarian basis. Certainly we'll be liaising, talking very closely, of course, via the UN, but also with the US, our close ally, and Julie Bishop's been doing a magnificent job there, as has our Minister for Defence.
You spoke about the approach last time. I think a lot of commentators have been saying the mistake wasn't the way they necessarily went in, but pulling out, the timing, the lack of stability, which is still telling 10 years ago. There'd have to be a regret or two, wouldn't there, in the overall approach? If you look at what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan over those many years, would you say there's nothing that could have been done
Well,
better?
hindsight is a wonderful thing in wars. I mean, the way Afghanistan has ended, the way Vietnam ended at the time, the way Iraq ended, is not to suggest that we shouldn't have tried in the first instance to bring about peace and good order in that place and to look after the humanitarian problems that were emerging because of failed government and horrendous behaviour of their leadership. So, sure, the end was not pretty, but I'm still arguing that Australia was right in going in to support or be part of the coalition of the willing in those first days with Iraq.
Okay,
and I was prepared for my son to be there and to put his life on the line with others.
Yeah, but this is not a question of hindsight. I and the Labor opposition did not support our going into Iraq without that United Nations authority, and it turned out to be an unmitigated disaster. The weapons of mass destruction were not there. In going in and doing what we did, we unleashed sectarian conflict, which is still with us now, and the situation we have there now, the disaster we have there now, is in part precisely due to the actions that we took. It is a case of sowing the wind and reaping the whirlwind, and we need to learn from that. We need to learn that we need to act through the United Nations.
That ship, whatever people think should have happened in the past, that ship has sailed, though.
That's right.
So,
Yes.
I mean, you can talk about, of course, learning your lessons from history, but that has happened now. Can you afford to only wait for what the UN wants to happen in this current situation? Is it wise, for example, to rule out boots on the ground even, because perhaps that could embolden the so-called Islamic State, knowing that people aren't wanting to get that involved?
Well, the opposition has supported the action being taken by the government in relation to this. That action, as Sharman has pointed out, has been humanitarian action.
Yeah, humanitarian
it's not a question of waiting. It's a matter of saying Australia is a member of the UN Security Council, and we should be using that position to make sure that action that is needed is taken, and that is internationally agreed, and that there are lots of other countries with an interest in this issue as well, and they need to be involved. It's that in the numbers you get the best kinds of outcomes.
Okay, I should stress, of course, that there has been no decision yet to assist with these airstrikes. Australia's only participated in this humanitarian drop that we're talking about. What might happen, of course?
Indeed. Let me add that, unfortunately, while the UN is the best we've got globally at the moment, it is not an unflawed organisation or agency. And when you come to the Security Council, sadly, the permanent members are such that they waited too long to help with Syria. We can't always expect or anticipate the right sort of response from those given the veto powers of the security.
Yeah, commentary about Russia and China dragging their feet. Look,
absolutely.
We'll take a break on that topic and come back after the break with more talk about the budget and the impasse that for now continues here in Canberra. Stay with us.
Get even more value with a CRV Plus limited edition. It's a clever combo with fog lights, auto dust sensing headlights, rain sensing wipers, 18-inch alloys, plus front and rear parking sensors. Hurry, it's for a limited time.
It's Mum's recipe. A steaming, bubbling history lesson in home cooking. It's overloaded and it's lopsided. This pie is made with love. This pie is made with Western Star.
Quick lunch on payday, it's the perfect combo. Like a golden schnitzel on handmade Turkish bread with creamy aioli. Hungry Jack's cheese and bacon schnitzel on Turkish. The burgers are better at Hungry Jack's.
Hi, I'm Jorge. I'm sponsored by Laura from Australia. This is my community right down the bottom of the hill.
My name is Amelia. I'm part of the Guiding Mothers program. Before World Vision came here, children were malnourished and they got diarrhea.
Some of the water in our community is dirty and can make us sick.
So World Vision helped Guiding Mothers learn more about hygiene. And we teach other mothers about washing hands and brushing teeth. Because children can get sick with diarrhea, stomach aches or fever.
So thanks to sponsors like mine, we're much healthier. From the Guiding Mothers, we've also learned about the most nutritious food that protects us from diseases. When we eat this food, it helps us to be intelligent. If I am healthy, I can study better. Maybe one day I'll be a maths teacher. Because our whole community is supported, kids like me have more opportunities.
Thanks to Jorge's sponsor Laura, families like his are gaining new skills and knowledge to overcome challenges. And they're sharing what they've learned with their whole community. Right now you can make changes like these happen for other children in need. Sponsor a child and help a community of children grow. Call 13 32 40 or visit worldvision.com.au today.
Looks like Mike's going to be off work for a few months after his accident.
Hope you'll be okay. But this is exactly why I've been on at you about income protection.
Hi, I really need to sort out some income protection.
I can give you a quick quote and help you apply right now with no paperwork or medical required. As an Australian resident, you can apply for an income replacement benefit of up to 75% of your regular monthly income, and your premiums are usually tax deductible too.
Sounds good.
So call Real Insurance now on 1300 158 602. We'll be there.
If you've been taking a course of antibiotics, a probiotic such as Inner Health Plus may assist with maintaining the balance of good bacteria. Inner Health Plus, available at pharmacies and health food stores.
Have you had your Inner Health Plus today?
You're watching Lunchtime Agenda. We have our political panel with us today discussing the day's events and topics. Kelvin Thomson from the Labor Party and Sharman from the Liberal Party. I might just shift on to the budget, the impasse that remains. And Kelvin Thomson, I'll put a couple of things to you today that the Treasurer wrote in an op-ed for the Australian Financial Review. It's very much a macroeconomic point of view, if you like, talking about spending. Now, the biggest spending by the government is the aged pension. That is scheduled to grow by 6% a year. The government says its move will in fact mean it still grows by 5.1% a year. Now that doesn't sound like a draconian change.
Well, they should have taken it to the election, Tom. In all fairness, if they believed that this needed to be done, they should have said so before the election. Before the election, they said no cuts to pensions, no cuts to health, no cuts to education, no new taxes.
Right.
Now we're getting the exact opposite of that.
They did, and I think you're entitled to point that out along the way, which I'm sure it's going to be right up until the 2016 election. But from a policy point of view, if you're going to balance a budget, I'll throw another figure at you again from the Treasurer. Medicare spending, it will still grow again. It was scheduled again to increase by 6%. Under their plan, 5.5%. Again, if you want to bring the budget back to surplus, you can say while you're doing it they're breaking a promise, but you have to look at reducing these large government spendings in some way, don't you? And these don't seem like draconian measures.
If the government was so concerned about balancing the books, why is it adding to the deficit through things like the paid parental leave scheme, through the increases in defence spending, through things like a freeway through Royal Park, which are adding billions of dollars to the budget deficit? And one day they tell us there's a budget emergency, and the next day they say, no, we've pretty much got it under control. So they are all over the place.
Sharman Stone, you're a straight shooter. Do we have a budget emergency, a crisis?
Yes, we do, because if you spend more than you've got and you are anticipating spending more than your revenue coming in, then you have a problem. You have a serious problem. Right now we're spending $1 billion a month on Labor's engendered debt and deficit. That is $1 billion that I'd love to see in my electorate.
Maybe revenue is the problem then. Have you been told what taxes the Finance Minister might be hiking up if he can't get his changes through?
Well, we've tried to look very closely at things like our fuel excise. We've said we want to increase the fuel indexation. That's a tax, if you like. It's an indexation, and we've had Labor oppose it. We've actually had them say in government.
Poor people do drive cars.
Indeed, they do, and country people. But when they were in government, they were more than happy to put a diesel excise through the system, which was going to make agribusiness a lot less viable than it is even today. So they didn't have a problem with looking at things like diesel fuel excise. I'm saying that in terms of our Australian government right now, even if we had, with all of the knowledge we have after being elected, been able to say, look, we're going to increase the pensions, but at a lower trajectory than anticipated. We're going to increase all of the welfare, in fact, whether it's disability support or aged or single parent or whatever, they'll increase, but not at the trajectory that has still grow. Now, even if we've been able to spell that out, this mob, the Labor mob, would still have opposed all of that because, as you know, before the election, we said we're going to abolish the heinous carbon tax. We had, I would say, a mandate par excellence to say, yes, you do that, but they still opposed it. So
is that part of the problem? Because you've got what you talk about as a budget emergency, and yet when you were going to repeal the carbon tax, you kept the spending. You had to get rid of the spending as well, didn't you?
Well, I wouldn't say we'd kept the spending. We've substantially reduced foreign aid, as you'd be aware.
No, but
down
the
to $5 billion
carbon tax compensation, I mean.
Well, in terms of the carbon tax compensation, unfortunately, because of the costs of energy now that have been stimulated by the carbon tax initially, the refrigerant gas price rises are almost as serious, more serious than the energy prices, then a lot of people are having a shock each time they look at their energy bill.
I just want to move on quickly because I want to get to medical cannabis. You've come out strongly in support of this.
Yes.
Those suffering chronic illness. I want to ask you further to that. What about decriminalising the drug altogether? And should it be up to states? Should Canberra at least keep out of this and let states do what they'd like to?
Well, I'd like to think the states could carry this and universally sort out the problem for those who have a terminal cancer, in particular where other painkiller drugs just don't work, or where they've got such nausea associated with their treatments. They literally starve to death. I would love the states to be able to step up and do that if they had the will. New South Wales and the Labor Party in Victoria just today said they might
decriminalise it full stop. No?
I would not be decriminalising any more drugs in Australia. We've got decriminalised alcohol in Australia, which causes the greatest health problems across the board. But certainly this is where some people get confused. Medicinal cannabis is not the same as a street-purchased marijuana or whatever other name it goes by. It doesn't give you the same highs, it doesn't give you the same psychotic outcomes and so on. It is a medicine that has more than enough international research to say it could save some, not many admittedly, but not only for those dying but those with MS or children in terrible circumstances with a particular fitting syndrome.
Kelvin Thomson, your thoughts on medicinal cannabis?
Yes, I agree with what Dr. Stone has said, and the Victorian opposition has said they're not going to decriminalise recreational drug taking, so you won't be able to smoke the stuff. Right. It'll be a matter of pills or liquid form, and it will be restricted to people who have terminal illnesses or life-threatening illnesses. So under strictly regulated and controlled conditions, the Law Reform Commission will be given the task of looking at this, and I think as Dr. Stone and I are both aware, there are some cases of terrible hardship, heartbreaking cases where I think this kind of change is warranted.
Yeah.
All right, well, good to end the show on a bit of agreement there. Thank you, Sharman Stone and Kelvin Thomson, for your time on Lunchtime Agenda today.
My pleasure.
Talk with you.
That's all the time we've got on today's program. Do stay with us. Coming up, Newsday, of course, all of today's news, sport and weather.